Alice, and I'm doing my PhD in Nelson Mandela University. And today I'm going to talk about a citizen-based approach to assess anthropodependence for large mammal in anthropogenic landscapes. Okay, so as I'm sure you are aware of, biodiversity is facing a huge decline, and 25% of mammal species are threatened. And this is mainly due to human activities like habitat alteration, destruction, the presence of invasive species and everything. And as you can see on this map in red, so people really modified the Earth. And so it's very challenging for human and wildlife coexistence. And some people are proposing a way of sharing land between humans and animals or biodiversity to connect people and nature rather than separating them. And it's essential to maintain, these sharing places will be essential to maintain biodiversity in human-dominated landscapes. And because it will provide connectivity with protected areas, for example, and it can also contribute to people's well-being. But now the question is that we need to have more knowledge on how mammals will be able to use this modified landscape. And some researchers proposed a framework on the different responses that species could have, how they could use human-dominated habitat. So they are saying that some species in blue here will consume human food resources, and they will also use human-dominated habitat, where if you look at when you look at anthropophilic populations, it's animals that are only going to consume anthropogenic resources, but they are not really making use of the habitat, so they need natural habitats to hide, for example. Synanthropic population here will use the anthropogenic matrix, but they are not going to consume human resources. And you have another group of species, the anthropophobic populations, which are going to avoid all interaction with humans, try to hide that they are not going to use their environment and they are not going to consume any of their resources. Another important aspect is that mammals can have different sensitivity to human disturbance. And so that's what you can see here on this graph. So you have completely different patterns. Some really are really afraid of humans, some try to really avoid them. And there is a new publication who shows that it's very important to take into consideration the presence of humans, so the physical presence of humans, but also to look at the human footprint, which is going to be more about human infrastructures, density of roads, or all this kind of hard human modification of the landscape. So because species can react differently to these different disturbances. So the objective of my research was to see if it was possible to use citizen knowledge to document the mammal occurrence in the anthropogenic landscape and see if we were able to see which mammals persist in this landscape and also what determined their occurrence in the anthropogenic matrix. So my study area is the garden route, which falls into the Cape Floristic region, which is a global biodiversity hotspot, so a very interesting area. It's also one of the only area in South Africa where there is a non-fenced protected area to the Garden Route National Park managed by SANParks. And it's an interesting place because it's lots of different landscapes. So you have forest, thicket, fynbos, and everything is interconnected intercept with also different agricultural type and pine plantation, so lots of human activities. And over the last 30 years, so there was a growth in the number of suburbs and residences, and the population is still expected to grow. So it's an interesting place to study human and wildlife coexistence. And this is why I'm going to focus on mammals above 500 grams, because they are very good indicators of ecosystem perturbations. They occupy a wide range of habitats and have different positions in the trophic chain, and they are most of the time very vulnerable to habitat fragmentation. Sorry. So for that, we use participatory approaches because it's a very heterogeneous landscape with lots of private property, so it was difficult to just go and see what was happening on the field. So we sent an online survey, and we just tried to send it to a maximum of person to have a broad view on the subject and have a good cover of the area. So we send emails, we published the survey in newspaper, used WhatsApp and Facebook groups, and we sent the survey from November 2021 to March 2022. And in the survey, we asked questions about the species occurrence that people, which species and at which occurrence they see animals on their property. And we also asked questions about the resources that they had on their property, the type of natural habitat, and ask questions about the presence of, so how many people were on the property, if they had dogs, and lots of information about things that could prevent animals to visit the properties, and fences and everything. Oop. And then I used the question for the answer for the survey to create a multivariate analysis to create gradients to respond to to have an idea of the presence of anthropogenic resources and everything, but I will show that just after. And I used generalized linear models to see what was important, like what was the driver of the number of species on human property, and also what explained the occurrence of species in their property. So we had 247 answers in the garden route. Most of them were in the George municipality with 44% of the answers, and we had very few answers around Mossel Bay. On average, the respondents spent 12 years on their property. Most of them have had dogs, so 71%, and 82% of the property were fenced, with 58 only partially fenced. And we had a good representation of other agricultural activities that were going on in the area, with like 6% of commercial farming, subsistence farming, and also like people doing home gardening. So 10% of the respondents saw like these 14 species on their property. So you can see a wide variety of diversity of occurrence, with species like bushbeck, which was seen on lots of property, whereas you have like few species. Few species like the otter, blue duiker, Cape Respock, common duiker, and leopard that were only seen in less than 20% of the property, so more rare in the landscape. On average, people saw 6 different species on their property, so showing that the diversity remained in the area, with a minimum of 0 species and a maximum of 14 species. And so that's the variable that I created for my, from the survey to try to assess what explaining the presence of species on human property. So you have, as an indicator of anthropogenic resources, we have variable about the availability of resources. So is it accessible for animals to go and eat or And we had a gradient of property from farming to residential areas. For natural habitat, we had a variable on the diversity that of natural habitat that we can find on their property, but also on integrity. So is the natural habitat in a very good state, or is it disturbed in alien species? And then for the disturbances, so we had an index of human footprint, so which described the presence of lots of road in the area and fences, and a huge and the proportion of the property that are excluding the wildlife. We had an index of connectivity, so using the presence of and absence of fences, and also we had index of the so we had a variable on the presence, the number of dogs on the property, and the presence of humans, and humans like highly using their property. And so if we look at the result of the GLM on the number of species on the property, we can see that so the variable in light blue are the most important. And so you can see that the diversity of species was higher on properties where anthropogenic resources were available and where there was a diversity and a good integrity of natural habitat. But the number of species decreased with the human footprint. And we also found a positive interaction with the number of dogs on human property, which was very weird, but we will explain it later. And I'm only going to focus on these three variables for the rest of my presentation. So now I looked at the occurrence of species on human property, and I only represented on this graph the link between the availability of anthropogenic resources and the diversity and integrity of natural habitat. And so first you can see that all the species are not responding in the same way. And if we go back to the framework that I presented you at the beginning, we can see that there are some species that are more likely to be anthropodependent or commensal species, where others are more like anthropophobic. They'll try to, they rely more on the presence of the diversity and integrity of natural habitat. Sorry. And we have species that are anthropophilic, so they like anthropogenic resources, but they're also more present on property with diversity of natural habitats. And then we have synanthropic species, the one who just are using the landscape, but not really, don't really need resources or natural habitat. And to add a bit of discussion on this, this framework, so we also looked at the link between the availability of anthropogenic resources and the human footprint. So first, what you can see is that all the species had a negative occurrence linked to the human footprint. But if you look more deeply on the graph, you have species that are more tolerant to anthropogenic perturbation, where others are highly sensitive. And we have this bush pig, which like anthropogenic resources, but don't really do well close to humans. So it's an interesting pattern. And so just to discuss briefly, so this framework can allow to better understand the responses of mammals to anthropogenic features, so habitat and resources. But it's very important to add the information about human disturbance, because it can really highlight species that are sensitive and that will be really impacted by humans' development and presence. And just to mention some other points, so this study was only done on a modified part of the habitat, so we don't have the comparison with protected area. So that's why there are some species that we can't really explain the results, but we are going to compare it with other sources of information to give more accurate feedbacks. So there was no effect of humans, which might be due to just the methodology, because we are only working on the modified part of the habitat, and same for the dogs. So we also think that it helps a lot to detect species on human property, because your dog is going to bark and just let you know that there is something coming close to you. And with this kind of approaches, that there might be some issues with species identification, because everybody counts identify all the species. There might also be just some bias towards species that are more diurnal and more easy to recognize. And respondents were mostly already involved in conservation, so we didn't manage to find people who were not interested at all in conservation. And I'm sorry, just a few points, but I can link it to my my poster. So, so it's possible to use citizen science to document mammal occurrence in anthropogenic landscape, which is a very good point. We show that so human footprint had a negative impact on the presence of species, but it also shows that it was possible to maintain biodiversity in this human-dominated habitat. And it's also proved the importance of diversity and integrity of natural habitats, and it proved the role that can have private owners on preserving and restoring this space on their property to leave space for animals, and especially for sensitive species. That's very, very important, and just minimizing disturbances on some places of their property can really help them to do better in the area. So there is a need to implement more critical biodiversity areas and create corridors and more favorable habitats for these species. Thank you.